Hello and welcome to the module where we're going to discuss bugs flow, bugs life cycle. What does this mean? We're going to talk about how do we actually track bugs. So when we made this report, when we notice them, how do they move through development life cycle? Of course, this very much depends on every team where you're working at. Some teams would have more complex, some teams would have less complex ways of tracking their bugs. They will have the bugs going through different people. Here we're going to teach you some common practices, some good practices. But please keep in mind that in practice, that this is always slightly different depending on the team. So let's begin. So why is this important? Why do we have a separate module about it? The bug report is really the main way of communicating between the QA, between coders, and between the producer. So sometimes you are lucky enough and your whole team is sitting in one room. But I'm recording this in early 2021, and most of us are working from a home, and we have to rely on a written communication and on eventual calls here and there. We are all dispersed, but it's sometimes common in a, let's call it, normal times as well, especially when it comes to QA. Very often is outsourced. So this bug report, it's one string which connects everybody together. So it has to go through multiple hands. And that's why it's really important that this process of how the bug travels through different parts of the team is well documented and it's understood by everybody. Also, if the bug flow is not optimized, it can take a lot of time just to administer it. Sometimes it go back and forth. You will have to have multiple meetings, and it can eat up a lot of time. Especially that can happen in the bigger teams. Like I worked with QA with a really large team, and the administration of bugs kind of took 80% of my time and big chunk of development time as well. And it's not the time best spent. Another thing, you know, I personally, I always believe that there should be rules, but they shouldn't be extreme. But if you have no rules about how the bugs should move through the system, bugs will take the life of their own. Very often it can happen that people don't know what to do with them, they don't address them, they're not sure what to do, so they're just kind of hanging in there. They're not open, they're not closed, they're in some kind of weird limbo of statuses, and it's about like, well, it's just here. Again, in my experience, in my previous one of my previous jobs, I will not name the employer, we had about 4,000 bugs in this limbo state. And 4,000 bugs, it's a lot. And then we had to create a process to resolve this 4,000 bugs stuck in a limbo that nobody really knew, are they solved, are they relevant, are they relevant. So it took lots of time to clear it up. So don't let this happen to you. And last but not least, potentially really big problems can fall through the cracks. That means that somebody will report a bug, somebody tested it, somebody found this really, really bad issue, which is practically a no-go for the software that you're testing. But because the right person hasn't seen it, the game came out with that bug included. And then when you start to look, well, how come nobody found it? It looks like somebody actually did find it 2 months ago, but nobody paid attention to it because bug was stuck somewhere in a limbo and it wasn't really passed on properly. So that's why it's important to really have set some kind of a flow, some kind of statuses through which the bug is going through, and that it's going to be passed through different hands within your project. Some of the common mistakes, I already mentioned some, but some of the common mistakes that usually happen when you're talking about the bug flow, one, process is too heavy. That if process is really, really heavy, it has multiple stakeholders. If you have multiple meetings about every bug, it can be too much. It can be too much. So just make sure to optimize it so you can have efficient process. On the other hand, you have other extreme, their process is too loose and it leaves room for interpretation. So everybody thinks like, oh, well, so that doesn't say anything, so I'll just leave it, or I'm just going to pass it on. And then you end up with a bug ping pong, that one bug can go back and back and forth multiple times, and then even cause problems within the team. Then of course it can happen that your process is too stuck up. We are working with the software, especially in the gaming industry. Things change all the time, constantly. If you work with free to play, we work with mobile, we work with live ops, we work with constant updates. Things change all the time. If you make the process so stiff that it can't really change or can't adapt to what you're doing, you will have problems. So your bug flow has to reflect the way of working and how you actually work, with how the complete software development is working as well. So leave room for improvement. Nothing is written in stone, and processes are here to serve the team, not the other way around. Another common mistake is there's no owner of the process. So in practice, what means if you don't have an owner, well, nobody owns it, or somebody might just pick it up who might not even understand the bug flow properly. What that means is that if something happens that the bug flow can't be followed, people just stop following it. They will not update it, they will not change it, they will not adopt a new way of working. It's just gonna slowly die. And then we go back to the situation where bugs are not addressed, they fall through the cracks, or they end up in some kind of bug limbo and hanging there forever. So make sure that there's always somebody in the team who is owning this process, who makes sure that it's enforced, that people understand each step, and who will be a driver for change when the change is needed. Generally, this is a QA manager or QA lead, but can often be a producer or project manager as well. It really depends on the team. But as long as it's somebody, it's all good. All right. So now we know what things we should pay attention to. So how to set up a good bug flow. And as I said earlier, every team is different. Every team has their own way of working. It can be slightly different. It can also change with time. So these are some good rules of thumb to help you out when you are starting and setting up the bug flow. First, analyze what you already have. Look at what's happening at the moment with your team, unless you're starting from the scratch with a brand new team just being built. Who is doing what? How are they doing it? Is it working? Is it working good? What isn't working at all? Are there any limitations of the software that you're using? Any limitations with the tools that you're using? Are there advantages? Don't change things for the sake of change. If some things are working, please keep them. There's no need to force change something just to make things different. So decide what you want to keep and decide what needs to be changed, what's not working, what can be done better. Now, sit together with all main stakeholders. This is really important because if one person decides to change the process, it's going to affect everybody who's addressing that bug. So it's probably going to affect firstly coders, possibly artists, game designers, producer, a project manager. Everybody in that circle is going to be affected by it. So just make sure that everybody's involved in this discussion. So you can be the owner of it. You can be like, okay, this is my suggestion. This is what like I will present how to change this process. But make sure that you get buy-in from all of them. They understand it, and to hear them out as well. Because sometimes something that would look really good from the QA perspective might not look that great from the perspective of producer or from the perspective of developer. So make sure to hear everybody out. Appoint the flow owner. We talked about it a little bit in the previous slide. So I said generally it's a QA or a producer, but whoever it is, make sure there's a person and make sure that everybody in the team knows who is the flow owner. Now document the flow in some manner. I believe in light and insightful documentation. It can be only one slide. It doesn't have to be a huge document. It doesn't have to have 20 pages. It can be something really, really simple that everybody can understand and fall back on if they're confused about what to do next. And last but not least, set up your bugs database in a way to reflect your flows so that it's what you agreed on and what you documented, it's also in your bugs database, so it's easy to follow. If there's too much discrepancies in your bugs database and in your flow, you might end up with a confused team which won't know what to follow. So make sure that your bugs database is also adjusted to reflect that. Okay, so here's one example of the transitions, how they could look. I will show you now a couple of different transitions examples just to give you an idea how it can be done. And you're going to see they're quite different. So here we have, I'm going to use the laser pointer. Okay, here we have like two options. You can have it, when you open your bug, you can have it in the status new, or you can have it in the status open. You can use this interchangeably, or they can have a different meaning. For example, very often the new bug would be something that was just reported by a tester or external tester or somebody in a team. Open means that somebody actually reviewed that bug and accepted it, that it's going to go into the production flow. Here they're shown interchangeably, so they show that you can either start with new or open. So they're not shown as two different options. From stage open, this is kind of the ideal flow. We'll go into in progress. That means it's assigned to somebody who is doing something with it. So either fixing it, reviewing it, trying to do something. Done, that means that that person is finished with fixing it. Verified, that means that the QA approved of that fix. And closed, that means that the verification was confirmed and the bug is closed, so it's not really in the flow anymore. Of course, there are other options as well. We can open the bug, we can cancel it. That's rarely used. It usually means that we had an intention of working this bug, but for some reason it's cancelled, it's not being done. Invalid means that it's either that's not a bug, it's kind of it was an issue with something else, misunderstood test case. It's a feature, although I have a serious opinions about if you report something as a bug and then they tell you it's a feature. Can you imagine how the end user is going to feel about it? They probably won't see it as a feature. They will see it as a bug as well. So there's something it was tested on a wrong build, for example, so that would make the bug invalid because it means that it doesn't appear on a software, but it appears on some side build that it's really not going to production. It can be reopened. That means it was closed and it was reopened. That we decided that the bug is actually valid after some time. Not a bug. Often would happen that QA might have opinions about how things should be in games. So it would be rather a suggestion on how to make a better feature or how to do something differently. And that's not a bug. That's that's a feature request. So this would be like not a bug. Or duplicate. It's pretty common. It's a good one to have because especially if you have multiple parties doing QA from different locations or from the different teams, they might not necessarily check the existing bugs in the database and you will get duplicates. So this is one of the possible transitions. This arrow here represents that, for example, if we are going to the verified status, that can also happen that the fix is not verified, and that will go back to the in progress status. So let's look at another transition. Okay, so see, this is a little bit of a simpler bug flow. So here we start with new. So it means the bug is reported, it's a new bug. Then we go with assign. That means the bug is assigned to somebody to fix. Most of the cases, this would be developer, but it can also be a game designer. It can be artist, somebody within your team. So that person to whom the bug is assigned will be opening the bug, and they can either work on it. It can reject it or defer it for some reason. And if the bug is being addressed, then it's gonna go under test. That means that bug was fixed by the person who was assigned to, and now it needs to be tested. If it's tested, it can either be reopened, that means that the fix failed, and then we go back into open, so we go into another loop, or we'll go to a verify, that means that the fix is confirmed, and after that, closed. So this is a bit simpler. And let's see another one. Oh, okay, here we go. So this is a bit more complex. So here we also start with a new bug. And after that bug goes for evaluation. So here somebody would review this bug and make sure that it's complete and it's something that we really want to work on. If there's something missing in the bug report, it can go into status incomplete. That means it needs additional information. It's just going to go back. That happens so often that, some crucial part is missing, like build number, platform version number, test steps, screenshots, video. So any of these might make the bug hard to understand, and it might be marked as incomplete. Then, of course, here is another statuses that would mean that bug is not really going into the production cycle. Invalid, that means it's not a bug. There's something. So this is either a feature. I said it's been tested on the wrong build, something like that. Won't fix. Won't fix is used. You should be careful with this one. Won't fix means that it won't be fixed. Generally, this can be used for example, very small bugs that don't have much effect on the player, and they might take, nobody has time to address them, so be done as a won't fix. But it can't be really used as like pick and choose, because some bugs need to be fixed. So be careful with this one. Duplicate, we talked about it before. Works for me. It's another one to be careful with. Very often it happens that testers will test on the device, on some version of the operating system. They'll find a bug. Then it's assigned to the coder, and the coder will go to test them in Unity on their machine, on their computer, and say it works for me. Yeah, but it doesn't change the fact it still doesn't work on a target device. So this is also something that can be used, but it might make this bug flow a bit longer, a bit more complicated, a bit. It can cause even a bit of strife between the QA and the developer. And there are ways around it. For example, that developers also use test phones. They have their own device where they can test the bugs that are reported. But it would require usually deeper communication between the QA and the developer. All of this means of these statuses would end up in resolved. That means that the bug is actually resolved, that there's no need to do anything with it. If the bug is accepted after evaluation, so it's something that we want to fix, it will be in status started. So that means somebody is working on it. Fixed, claimed fixed, basically, meaning that the fix is committed. It's resolved. That means that fix is committed to the bug, or it's one of the statuses. And then the bug will go to the verification. That means the QA will verify if the fix is really working. After verification is other status verified. And also can be reopened if you see the fix failed on the target device and operating system. If it didn't fail, if everything is okay, we can close it. But otherwise, it goes to reopened. And if it's reopened, we go all the way back to new and evaluation. So this is one of the more complex bug flows. So as you can see, you can use slightly different terminology. You can use slightly different flow. It can be very confusing if you had somebody who worked in one team for a long time and they used one flow for a long time. And then the person goes and starts into work a new team where they use the same terminology but in different way. So that's why it's really important to really map this and really explain what each status means to every member of the team, so everybody really understands, okay, this is the right status and this is how I hand it over to the next person in the production team. Okay, so we spoke a lot about the statuses and what they mean and how to do them. So let's talk a little bit about roles in the bug flow, like human roles. So who can do what? Now, if you make roles very, very limited, producer or QA manager might end up spending extra time sending statuses to others. If you're too worried about security or somebody doing something wrong with the bug, that happened as well to me in one of my previous projects, that it was so stiff that basically producer and a QA spent lots of time. I think I spent about 40% of my time just going through bugs and fixing them or transitioning them for other people. So to have like my Slack full of messages, can you transition this bug for me? Because I can't. And I had to go to the project manager and complain, and we had a bit of an argument. And well, at the end, it was we gave power to the people, and they could transition the bugs, and everybody was happy, and we were more efficient. But make sure that you don't limit it too narrowly, because then it's going to overburden QA, I said, or your producer with unnecessary work. On the other hand, if you have too loose roles, so that means that everybody can do everything in a bug flow, then you end up with transition bullies. That's how I call them. So there are people who like to decide on everything. I work with those as well. They would just decide that bug is not worth fixing or that somebody shouldn't work on it, although it's none of their business and can cause potential team problems. It can cause issues that some serious bugs, valid issues are missed, that people's priorities are confused, that even that some work gets wasted. So like going to another extreme, there's another problem as well. Roles are usually best decided that they're tied to, in a way, to transition status, that QA and producer should have maybe more leeway, while the other members of the team should have a bit more restricting rules, because you don't want to stress them out about really knowing the insights of your bug management software. They should understand the flow and have enough freedom to be able to do what they are supposed to do and transition the bug in a way that it's enough for their work. So just make sure that you define these roles, and also, as I said, like sometimes you can start with maybe something too tight, but then if you see it's not really working, taking too much time, make it looser, or other way around. I mean, every team, again, is a different, people have different level of experience, work with bugs, different preferences. So just make sure that your team can function, that this serves the team, and that the bugs are flowing through your production pipeline seamlessly. So a little bit more on the bug flow, a little bit more information. Uh, Bug flow can often become the most problematic part of QA, and that's one of the reasons also I talk about it so much here. From time to time, it's good to clear out your bugs repository. So in your bugs database, you will end up having lots of bugs. Depending on the size of your game, you will end up with anything from 800 to 10,000 bugs. I worked on projects which had even more than that. So it's a fact when you have multiple people, big teams, that you're gonna have these bugs floating around the system. So it's good that every now and then you clear the repository. That usually make a meeting, take a couple of stakeholders from different disciplines, and then you go through these bugs. I would say don't spend your time on the minor bugs, but focus on the ones that are like there for a long time, they're not addressed, but they are critical or high importance bugs. Make sure that those are addressed in some way and cleared out, and then they're just hanging in a limbo. The perfect way to do it is that all bugs should be addressed one way or another. They don't have to be fixed. Don't confuse that. But they have to be addressed. They have to be in some kind of finite status. That means that they should go through the system, they shouldn't be stuck in some place, and if they are not fixed, they should be admin status postponed or cancelled, not a bug, invalid. So they should be in some state that this bug is addressed, that they're not stuck somewhere waiting for somebody to look at it or do something with it. And good rule of thumb, if the bug is assigned to you, or if you encounter some bug and you don't know what to do, ask. Ask your supervisor, ask a person working with you. It's like, hey, what should I do next? There's no shame in asking, especially if you're not necessarily dealing with the bug so often. Of course, this course is aimed at the QA personnel. Bugs are bread and butter. You will work with bugs all the time. But still, if you're in a new team or if something was changed in a process, make sure to ask. It's better to ask than put bug in a wrong status and then you confuse it or delay it, or even worse, it might cause some problems with the submissions and with releases. So, in doubt, always ask. All right. And so here are some of the guidelines how to implement the bug flow. Really important, I can't stress this enough. Make sure that the entire team understands what each bug status exactly means. And that doesn't mean only QA and developers. That means also producers, that also means designers, that also means executive producers, product managers, artists, UI artists, content narrators, like anybody who is in your customer support, anybody who is in your team. Teams can have different composition. They should understand what each bug status means and understand the whole cycle. So document it somewhere. Also make sure that every person understands the responsibility as regards of each bug. That it means like, okay, this is your place in a team, this is what you do with the bug if it comes to you, this is your responsibility with it. This is especially important to understand for people who are not necessarily dealing with bugs very often. For example, maybe audio people or an artist, although the artists kind of deal with bugs as well. But so they might not have like daily exposure to bugs. So just make sure they also understand what's the responsibility and how to make the bugs flow and how they're supposed to address them, when they're supposed to address them, what to pay attention to. We had a case that, for example, artists were feeling a little bit uncomfortable with bug flow, although it's a relatively simple one, and they just didn't check bugs because they were drawing, and when you get a drawing, they kind of like focused on that. So one of the rule of thumb that worked for me in the teams like that before was that everybody puts a reminder in their calendar every day at hour of their choosing, either in the beginning of the day or after lunch break, whatever, it's a good time, saying check bugs database for any bugs assigned to me. Lots of time, most of the bugs databases have this automatic notification that you will get an email, but sometimes people don't look at those emails, or sometimes they just go to the spam. So I would say this worked really well for me in the past, might work for you as well. Just make sure that every member of the team has this little note. Just log in the bugs database, check if there's anything for me. If no, okay, continue working. Ensure that enough detail is entered in each status of change. This is especially if we are rejecting bugs, making them invalid, or putting them in any other status than in progress fix, like following the optimal pipeline. And here, why we want to do that? Because if the QA doesn't understand why this game is invalid, they will just reopen it, send it back. And then you might end up again, bugs ping pong. So explain why it's invalid, explain what's missing, explain why it's not going to be fixed, because the person who reported it then is going to understand, okay, we're not doing this now because of A, B, and C. And you will not get that bug back to you the next day or 2 days later. And again, avoid entertaining bug-related requests without an appropriate change in the status of the bug in your bugs database. This would happen sometimes. Often happens when people come from the management or from something like us, or from the side, or somebody who's in a company for a longer time and gonna say, I noticed this, can you fix it? And then person will fix it, and then you are like, okay, well, what's wrong here? The problem is fixed. Yes, but the bug is still there, waiting to be assigned in a limbo. And when you get a habit of doing that you just go and ask one person a team who's going to fix it for you, you will end up with lots of bugs being fixed like that. That also means that these bugs are going to be committed, the fixes are going to be committed without proper verification of the fix. So the QA will not really test, is this fix really working? Usually when these fixes are done like that, it means the coder is going to just commit the fix and test it themselves. if it's working. It usually means they're going to test it in Unity or whatever development software you're using, not necessarily on device, definitely not on a range of devices, definitely not on a range of devices and operating systems. If it's a small bug, okay. If it's a bigger bug, there might be a problem. So make sure that, and again, this is not the only problem for the product. It's also a problem for any kind of matrix that you have for the bugs, because your numbers will not match. You will not have really realistic picture if you get the data from your bugs database, because you will have way more open bugs than you actually have. So just make sure that these things don't happen. They might happen every now and then. There are feature creeps, there are bug creeps as well. But don't make it a rule. And if you catch this happening frequently, have a discussion and try to find a way how to really address these bugs that are really urgent. Somebody wants a fix so urgently that they are that using the existing flow rather than just doing them on the side, not as a part of the flow and not of the part of the whole bug process. So I hope you found this useful. To understand how the bugs flow and how they move from the system. As I said, even if this is QA focused training and QA role is usually somewhere in the beginning and the end, QA is here to report the bugs and then ends to verify them and potentially close them, while fix and all of this other stuff is happening in the middle. It's really important for QA to understand all statuses and what they mean, because it means you can also track the status of the bug, especially if you found a bug that you consider being very important or crucial to be fixed, that you understand what has been done with it, who is the right person looking at it. So it's important to understand the whole flow, and also why some bug can't be fixed overnight. It might take a little bit of time, and how the other members of the team are looking at it as well. So I hope you found it useful, and until the next module. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the module about bug reporting. So here we're going to talk about, meat and bone of the QA, how to actually report bugs. Again, like with everything else, there is no ultimate template for bug reporting. Every studio, every software developer has their own preferred way, but here we're going to go through some good rules of how to report bugs, what report should include, and how to go about it. So let's start. So why does it really matter? We mentioned this before. It's the main communication between the QA, between the coder, artists, producers, even product managers, even people outside of the team. So it's something that might potentially be seen by multiple people, and it has to be easily understood by everybody who actually reads that report as well. Then, of course, there is the issue of legacy. Some issues we find and then they are fixed or claimed fixed, and then they reappear 6 months later or a year later. So it's important to have bugs like in some kind of repository, well reported, that we can actually go back to them if it's needed. Also, if the bugs are incorrect, if there's something wrong about them, or if they're not relevant, or or if the software is misunderstood, they can waste very valuable time. from the QA, but also from the development team or from the production producers and from the project managers as well. And of course, they will mess up analytics. So we are looking into like how mature the software is, and if the bugs are not reported correctly, you're going to have a wrong idea of where software actually is. So this is just some of the reasons why it's really important to have a good bug reports and that are done in a way that follows specific rules and that they can be easily understood by not only QA and a coder, but a wider range of people. So what does the bug report include? First, it's important to have a good headline. You might think it's irrelevant, but it's actually quite important because firstly, you will have hundreds of bugs, if not thousands. And sometimes it just helps to have this visual clarity. If you see the list of bugs, might be easier to recognize what they're looking for. And it's a good practice to have a standard headline so that would kind of follow some template. For example, you might have start with either initials of the people or person who reported, or if it's initials of the outsourced company that reported bugs, then you can have something like, okay, the platform, Android, iOS, something else, then part of the game where that bug appears, like UI, levels, performance, and then a short description of the problem. So here we have one example how it could look like, but it doesn't have to be like that, but as long as it has some kind of standard that everybody can understand and follow through, it's going to make everybody's life much easier. Then super important, I can't emphasize how important that is, version tested. So on which version of the software you found this bug. Why is this important? Because depending on the development process, you might even have multiple builds per day. If you don't put the name of the build where you found the bug, it might be that developer is going to check it. It's like, doesn't appear to me. It might be that it's already fixed somewhere. It might be that it's not fixed. It might be that it's in live. So it will maybe change the priority of the bug. So it's super important to have the version of the game. Where did you find the bug? Super important. Even like, of course, if it's only two people working and one is testing, it's a bit easier to understand, but especially if you have multiple parties testing, you have internal testers, external testers, super important. Then steps to reproduce. Before steps to reproduce, it's also, for example, it's good to write if there are any preconditions that you have to do something specific to be able to get there. But sometimes that's not needed. It's like, it will just pretty straightforward thing. You're playing the game, that's it. So you don't necessarily have to put that. And here is, so here you're going to put like, how did you manage to get this bug? So step 1, 2, 3. The clearer the steps, the better. It's better to have a bit extra than not enough. Because I said again, this bug might go through multiple hands to multiple people. Something that's obvious to you might not be that obvious to somebody else. You should also have expected results. So that means like what was supposed to happen and what actually happened when you follow these steps. Because again, sometimes it might not be obvious. Any kind of screenshot, video, anything supporting a log, anything that supports your bug report. So any kind of hard proof. So that screenshot is great, video is even better. If you manage to get some kind of crash log or something like that, that would be helpful as well. Anything that you can think of that can help. Repro rate. So this is very important when you have bugs like crash, freeze, performance issues, because it kind of helps determine how big of the issue this is. Sometimes game would crash once in a blue moon, and it might be due to many different things. But if it really doesn't happen very often, if it happens once in 2 days of testing, it won't be necessarily seen as a high priority. But if you have a crash like 3 out of 5 times when you play the game, now we're talking about something which is more serious. So repro rate kind of helps determine how important it is to investigate this issue, really look into that. So it's very often misunderstood. We're going to talk about it a little bit further down in this module, but it's really important to have, especially for these types of bugs, because this information really helps. And last but not least, priority and severity. Sometimes you will have only one of those, and that's okay. But what's really important is to understand what is priority and what is severity, because it's not the same thing. Okay, so here's a bit of a humor on bugs, but these are some really good rules. Please report bugs, and I always say report them as you find them. Don't sit on them. Don't wait for them till the end of the day, because the sooner you report it, the sooner developer can see it and address it. If you are testing the whole day and in the last hour of your work you report 20 bugs, it's the end of developers working day as well. So his day is going to end with having 20 things to do first thing in the morning. So please, and these bugs will not be addressed until the next day. So report the bugs as you find them. Also, make sure that you understand the bug completely. You know, there's no need to like, oh, just going to write it really quickly. Make sure that you understand that how it really affects the game. What are the preconditions? How often does it happen? So that you really understand what's going on. Take the screenshots, take a video if possible. Then there is a rule that generally the bugs like to appear in clusters. So if you find one, especially if they're more serious bugs, if you find one bug, there's a chance you're going to find few more bugs in that particular area of the game as well. So make sure that if you find some significant bugs in that part of the game, spend some maybe more time testing that part of the game, because there is a chance that you will find more. Reporting quickly. Be honest, don't exaggerate. Nobody likes it. Of course, sometimes misunderstandings happen, that something looks worse than it is, or it looks better than it is. And that's normal, because you don't necessarily have access to the code, or you can read code to see how big something potentially might be as a problem to fix. But don't exaggerate on purpose to make it look worse than it is, because it just kind of decreases the trust in a QA. And I said, like, also, if you're really convinced it's a big issue, don't be afraid to speak up and say, I think this is a big issue and it's going to affect players really badly. So I said, bugs, put the steps how you found this bug. It might be obvious to you, especially if you're testing something for a long time. You're like, of course it's there, but it won't necessarily be so obvious to the coder or to other people who are looking into this bug. So make sure that you notice like as many details as possible. All right. So I'm going to talk a bit about mandatory versus optional fields. So we always report bugs in some kind of bugs databases. Sometimes they would be reported only in Excel or Google Sheets or some kind of document, but that's pretty rare. That's done generally just for very limited small software. Usually bugs are always reported in some type of bugs database. There are some of them which are very popular, especially in the gaming industry, that are used a lot, like Jira. Bugzilla used to be quite popular before, but there's no rule. I mean, literally studios can use anything to report bugs. And when you work in a QA, you will have some input into how the bugs database is set. So one of the things that you can set in a bugs database is the fields that you use. So it could be mandatory. That means that you have, when you're writing a bug report, that you have the field that needs to be filled in, it must be filled in. Or you can have optional fields where you can put more information, but you don't really have to. So it's generally recommended that you decide together with QA and the other stakeholders about which fields are must have and which one are not, because different people in a team might need different information. And it kind of helps you to fill in these forms so that you will not forget to put something in a bug. So it's kind of course, easiest way is to say, hey, let's make all the fields in a bugs database mandatory. But again, that might be too much. It might be difficult to get in some information, and it might cause delays or problems in the bug reporting. You might get a QA who's going to be reluctant to report bugs because they're like, oh, I don't know, not really sure how to do this. So this is something that keep in mind, that it's always good to have mandatory fields because it makes QA's job easier. You will not forget certain things. Also makes it easier for the junior QA. If you're just starting, you'll not have to figure it out yourself, that, oh, what's important here. You can say, okay, I have to really figure out like this part. But don't make it overwhelming. Don't make it too much, and then it kind of defines the purpose. All right, so we spoke before about severity versus priority and what's the difference. So severity is like, what is the impact of the bug? So how much is going to impact the player? How much is going to impact the end user? Priority means how quickly it needs to be fixed. So they're two slightly different things. High priority, it's usually a high severity. So it means that the impact is high and it has to be fixed really. It is because these bugs need to be fixed really quickly. But it's not necessarily, you can have a bug which has a high impact, but it doesn't necessarily have to be fixed immediately. There are sometimes exceptions to the rule. Now, if you have to choose one of these fields, go with severity, because as a QA, you can understand severity better. You will understand how this bug affects player better than priority. Priority is usually decided by producer or senior producer, product owner, executive producer, because they see the bigger picture. There's lots of moving parts, so they will generally decide about priority. So if you need to stick with one as a QA, stick with severity. As a severity is generally technical, and it comes from the tester. And I said it's basically impact on a system architecture, but it's really how does it impact the player. That's like the most important thing. So severity also does not change. If something is severely affecting the player, it will always severely affect the player. But priorities change as well. Something that might be a high priority now will become maybe low priority, or more frequently, something that was a low priority might become a high priority. Especially happens if you find some kind of really big bugs with a high severity early on in a testing period. They might not necessarily have to be fixed right now, but the closer you're getting to the launch, the priority of the bug is going to grow. So this is just to kind of help you understand what is the difference between priority and severity and why they shouldn't be mixed up. So how to determine the severity? When you're doing testing for some time, you have a pretty good idea. But when you're just starting, or when you start to work with some new software or new game that you never worked before, then it's good to kind of have some tools to help you out determine this. As I mentioned before, one of the most important things that you can think of is like, how is this going to impact the player? If you're talking about software, how it's going to impact the user. You have to be able to put yourself in a player's shoes and imagine, okay, how would this affect me if I would be playing this game? Then does it have any legal, financial consequences for the game or for the company, etc.? Is it something that might be potentially illegal? Is it gonna affect the reputation of the company? Things like that. Does it affect money or income in any shape or form? That's why usually the bugs which affect shop or any kind of purchasing process in the game are generally very high severity, because they affect the revenues of the game directly. Another thing, is this a root cause for several other high severity bugs? Sometimes you will find an issue which is kind of a root cause for many other issues that are happening, and you can't fix those until you fix this root bug. So this would be a high severity bug, because it means that it has a really impacts lots of things in the game. Now, does it require several people and lots of time to fix? Some bugs would require investigation, help from somebody else to come on board. So this would also mean, okay, this is going to be probably quite severe issue. Super important. Will it be rejected by the platform? I like to point out, there's an example from my career that I would like to point out, that we were submitting a game to PlayStation, to Sony. And in the documentation that was submitted together with the game, Sony was spelled with small s. Now you might say this is not severe bug, come on, it's a small s. But this really affects the, because this is the platform requirement that Sony has to be spelled with a capital letter S. And it was a really severe bug. and because we wouldn't pass submissions to the PlayStation because Sony was spelled wrong, even if it was just capitalization of one letter. And I had a heated discussion with the producer on the game, and well, I was right, and we had to fix this before the game had to be resubmitted. But it says that sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it's something small as this, but it's a platform requirement. And even if it's a small thing, if it means you're going to fail the submissions, it just needs to be fixed, even if it's just one letter. Then will it affect company reputation, game ranking, or something similar? That if we do something in a game which might not be really well accepted by the fans or might be considered politically incorrect or offensive. I said, also remember, so bug can be very high severity, but can take only a few seconds to fix. So like changing the spelling of letter S is a literally 1 second job, but it's really high severity. And there are also lots of low severity bugs, but they can take weeks to fix. They can take a long time to fix. And then we have to ask ourselves, is this worth our effort? Because time and money is limited. We are better off using this energy to fix something which has a higher severity than spending it like for weeks to do something that has a very, very low severity at the end. So it's actually quite important to really understand severity to make sure that we feel confident about the severity of the bug. So how do we decide levels of severity? So when we put them in a bug, so when we are building the process for the bug reporting, I would always say there's no need, like with everything else, no need to have too many levels, because the more levels you put, there's a more room for interpretation, for guessing, and then generally everything kind of goes into the highest category or the lowest category. 3 to 4 levels is enough. There's no need for more. And generally it will go something like low, medium, high, or highest, critical. You can also use critical, severe. There are different wording that can be used here. This is not by any means only one that you can use. But just make sure that it's not too complex, it doesn't have too many levels, and everybody understands what it means. Sorry. Now, how to determine priority? I said this is usually not necessarily about that QA decides, it's the producer who decides, but I will still explain it so they understand the process behind it. Priority means when does this bug needs to be fixed? If it's important issues that prevent submissions, it will have very high priority because it means that this game is not going to pass submissions, or this update will not pass the submissions because there's something here wrong that just doesn't allow it. For example, and there have things, for example, frequent crashes, but on early build, we'll have high severity because, of course, there's obviously something seriously wrong. We have lots of crashes, but it will not have high priority yet. But the closer we are getting to that launch, the priority is going to get higher and higher. And here, generally, there are 3 to 4 statuses: low, medium, high. And again, this is not by all means the only terminology you can use. There are other terminology that can be used here as well. You can use like severe, you can use urgent. I've seen many different things, but again, like with everything else, as long as everybody understands what it means, and as long as there's not too many statuses, and it works for a team, that's all you need. All right, so we mentioned also steps to reproduce and why is it important. Rule of thumb: too much information is better than too little information. If you're in doubt, or especially if you're starting on the new project, a new game, on with a new team, better start with more information than with too little. Because if you have too much information, at worst, somebody might be annoyed because they have to read through lots of steps. If you don't have enough, bug might come back to you and say, can I get more info? And then it's just the whole process is prolonged. So more is always better. Don't presume that reader will know what you did. Put exact information. Sometimes, especially in a hurry or when we work on a project for a bit longer, we like to take shortcuts. Don't, because you never know who is going to read it. So make sure that you always put everything as detailed as possible. And especially when we are coders are fixing some more complex bugs or bugs that have an unusual preconditions or ways of reproducing, it's really important to give them as much information as possible. Sometimes it'll feel to you like it's irrelevant or not really important, but it might give this crucial clue to the coder what it is to fix the bug. So it can help save hours of work. So even if it might seem a bit irrelevant to you, rather include it in the steps to reproduce on a bug description than don't. As I said, again to the rule, more is better. And please use straightforward language. This is kind of a technical report. There's no need for exceptionally long sentences, poetic English. Keep it simple, keep it easy to understand, make it straightforward. Don't overcomplicate it. Because that happened a couple of times as well, that you have one sentence in a bug report which goes into 4 lines, and then everybody just scratches their head and they're like, what did tester mean here? So make sure that it's pretty straightforward and it's easy to understand to anybody who reads this report. So I'm going to talk a little bit about repro rates, which is very often misunderstood. Especially when we have outsourced testers who are not necessarily working with a team and they don't really understand maybe priorities or complexities of the game or of the development. You generally want to have repro rates or production rates as a mandatory field for all bugs that would involve crash of the game, freeze, kicking you out of the game, or even worse, with bugs that I've seen a couple of times, it actually kicks you out of that kicks you out of the phone, actually, it kills the phone. But on the other hand, if it's bug like about, something is visually skewed or it's not really visible or there's misplaced pixel, having repro rate 50 out of 50 means absolutely nothing. Here I'm very harsh, but 1 out of 1, it's not a repro rate. That means you tested this once and you found a bug. Repro rate means it's a reproduction rate. So you need to have at least 1 out of 2 to call it a reproduction rate. As a rule of thumb, what I like to use and what kind of gives the best information is that you have a minimum of 5 attempts. But if it seems fairly random when you're testing, it can go up to 10. So it will help coder to solve the problem, but also helps the producer to assign a priority and for you to understand severity of this problem. 8 out of 10 reproduction rate bug is a much bigger problem than the one which has 1 out of 20. So if you have a freeze which happens 8 times out of 10, it's a much bigger problem with that same freeze is happening once out of 20. Once after 20 is probably something that you can call maybe a fluke, maybe it had something to do with the Wi-Fi connection or something like that. Or you might kind of want to keep an eye on it in the future to see if it happens, but you won't necessarily spend lots of time on it. But if you have 8 out of 10 freeze, yes, that means, okay, we have to spend lots of time on this. This is a problem. This is really important to fix. So this is what it kind of tells you. This is all about. It's the same bug, but repro rate just makes it really, really different in importance. So it's super important. But when it comes to small graphical glitches, things that are, obviously happening everywhere, don't do 50 out of 50. It's a waste of everybody's time. Make it 5 out of 5 if you have to, but even for that, you really don't. Especially if it's something very tiny, you really don't even have to do that. So this is something where you have to use a little bit of your common sense as well. When does higher number of attempts actually make sense, and when it gives this crucial information to the developer to fix the bug or to understand the severity of the bug, or when it's just something like a vanity, I'm going to spend some time because somebody told me to do this. So, use your common sense. So a little bit about the platforms. We have the separate module on platforms, and we already spoke about how important this is. But this is also going to affect the severity of the bug, like how widespread the problem is. Of course, you can't verify every bug on all devices and all the original operating system. We know now this would take you about 20,000 devices at least to try to do this. So, and it's very time consuming and not necessarily even efficient. Now, if it's not exclusive to the platform, for example, if it's an issue which is related to something with Google Play integrations or with the Game Center. You will need to check another platform if your game works on the other platform as well. So just make sure that, okay, we found this bug, performance bug, or this issue on Android. Let's check if it happens on iOS as well. Usually use principal testing devices minimum. Generally, I always recommend people to have these kind of crucial key devices like principal testing device. So they would have like one device representative for one platform and another one of the other platform. So this is for your quick checks. And generally it's something that it's relatively common. So you want to have the device that is popular and relatively common. So you want to have, if it's Android, you probably want to have some kind of very popular Samsung device, for example, a relatively new Samsung device. Not maybe the newest to the most expensive, but the newer one. And the same for the iOS. So this is your first step. And then generally how to verify quickly. Check on the lowest supporting device and check on the lowest supported version of operating system. Check on the highest supporting device and highest supported version of the operating system, which should be like the newest one. This is going to give you the range. If the bug appears on your principal testing device on the lowest supported and highest supported, chances are it's probably happening everywhere. Of course, then, if you have time, if you have manpower, you can also check one operating system version up and down. So that will give you like 99.99 certainty that it happens everywhere. And of course, don't do this for every bug. If you have a minor bug that you're not even sure that it's going to be fixed, just check if it happens on the other platform, but don't necessarily go into this in-depth confirmation. Does it happen on other platforms and devices? But we are talking about serious issues, it's like performance issues or something which is key element of the gameplay. Please go through this and verify to see like how widespread this problem actually is. And it's also going to help developers to understand where might be the root cause of the problem for this bug. Now, on versioning, this is something that it's super important, and even if the QA doesn't necessarily decides on this, it affects your job very, very much. You need to decide which versions are gonna go under test. Depending on the way how you develop, you could have multiple builds per day, and there is no need to test every single one. So here's something where you work together with the development team and with the producer, and you decide, okay, which builds are actually being tested and what's going to be tested on them, because they might be quite different as well what they include. Some builds, for example, can be used just to test specific fix, like for example, especially for maybe more complex bugs, a coder might attempt to make a fix, and then he's going to say, okay, just verify on this particular build if this is fixed. Don't test anything else, because build is not meant to be tested anything else, just to kind of verify if this fix is working. Always make sure that you're testing the right version. In theory, QA shouldn't worry about it. In theory, developers and producers should tell you this is what you need to test. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So just make sure that you always know what is the right version and ask. Talk with the developers, talk to the producer and say, hey, I'm testing, or just say, like if you can't reach them, just say, I'm testing this version now. If you want me to test something else, let me know. In that way, you clear your hands. But it's super important because you can be wasting your time if you're in the wrong version. Also, make sure that all the versions are in the bugs database. So you usually have to add all of these versions in your bugs database. Sometimes it's a QA job, sometimes it's developer's job, sometimes it's a producer job, sometimes it's a project manager's job, depending on the composition of your team. But just make sure that they're always there. You don't want to be in a situation you're reporting the bug and then you realize that that build was not actually entered in the bugs database, and then you have to spend time chasing somebody to make sure that this is added to the bugs database. So this is something that, I said, like, it's not necessarily QA's job every time, but it does affect QA a lot. So, you might have to take care of this yourself. And said, it's especially important in verifying bugs as well. You always have to make sure that you verify the bug on the right build, because Otherwise, you might have these fake fails, and then it becomes very frustrating because it's like, hey, I just verified the bug, fix didn't work, and then coder is like, it works for me. How come it doesn't work for you? And you can go back and forth a couple of times until you realize, well, you were actually verifying this on the wrong build. This is the real life story. It happened not once, it happened many times. So just make sure every time when you verify the fix of the bug that you're on the correct build to do so. All right. Okay, so a little bit about legendary bug versus feature. So as this drawing nicely shows, um, it's not that simple. And if you report something as a QA as a bug, and then you get the answer, well, it's a feature, designer and a product manager or executive producer maybe should get a bit worried about how this feature is going to be understood by players. Um, I'm pretty harsh about it. It's basically if QA reports a feature as a bug, it's a bug. If a tester thinks that feature is a bug, what do you think the end player is going to think? Testers are usually players themselves. They're quite experienced. They played, they usually played multiple games or tested multiple games, or they might have been working on this particular game for a long time. If they think this is a bug, players are probably going to have the same understanding. They will not really figure out this feature. So even if it's a feature, it should be better explained. And if this happens, of course, this is not QA's decision, but I would always say that whoever is making decisions about this is being a producer or product manager, lead designer, whoever, to really take it back as a feedback. This might be misunderstood by the player. It was misunderstood by QA. Maybe we should kind of rethink how we introduce this in the game. It's quite simple and might save lots of effort to the team further down the line. So a bit of a talk about who sees the bugs, and lots of people can see them and they're going through multiple hands. And of course, one of the things that's really important is how to assign bugs. So I would always suggest to decide whom to assign bugs before you even start testing. Because otherwise, if they're unassigned, they might end up in this limbo that you might end up with a couple of hundred bugs that are assigned to no one. And then somebody has to go through them, read them, and assign them to the right person, which can be quite a job and might take quite some time. I know I had to do it myself once or twice in my career. Now, they can be assigned directly to the person who needs to look into them, for example, to the coder, to the artist, to the designer, or they might have to go through a producer or QA lead. It really depends on the size of your team, about your team composition. Do you have internal partners, external partners? How many people you have in QA? So it really depends on that. And there are, of course, pros and cons for every approach. Of course, if it's direct distribution, if you assign directly to the person who can fix this issue, it's much faster. It goes pretty smooth, and there's no waiting time. So bug is going to be seen really quickly by the person who can actually do something with it. But of course, some team members might not be comfortable with bugs. And if you have a really big team, if you have a team where you have like 10 developers, you might not necessarily know which is the right developer to assign it to. We'll just assign it randomly to somebody who's going to look into it and say, well, this is not for me. Nicolina used to work on this bug or something similar 2 days ago, so it's for her. But the coder might not necessarily reassign this bug to Nicolina. He might just leave it. About the other hand, if everything goes through one person, it can become a bottleneck. If you have one person who has to go through all the bugs and then assign them correctly, it can happen that this basically becomes a full-time job, that somebody is just assigning bugs. The ways how I've seen it done before, and it worked depending on the size of the team, either it goes to the QA manager, who also kind of has a brief look into the bugs, kind of quick verification to see if they're reported correctly, they have necessary information, and that they are relevant. And then the QA manager would assign them to somebody else, or I've seen them also being assigned to the discipline lead, so they would be assigned all the bugs related to the code would be assigned to lead coder. All of them related to the design would be assigned to a lead designer, and then it would be their responsibility to distribute these bugs to the rest of the team, because they might know better who is doing what, or which is the best fit for the right person to fix it, which you might not know, especially if you are doing external QA and you don't even have the knowledge of the team. It really depends. That there are pluses and minuses, but what's important is that this is really decided before you start to test, so that as a tester, you know whom to assign the bug when you write it, so that this bug report doesn't end up nowhere, but actually ends up on the table of the right person who will know how to take it further or what to do with it. A little bit about relevance of the bugs. This is something that I found very frustrating sometimes. Be as objective as possible, and focus on the quality of your bugs, not quantity. I mean, there is no, well, sometimes there's recognition for the person who reported the most bugs, but it's not necessarily the right way to measure someone's efficiency. I would say if you're testing software and you can't find any new bugs, it's time to change approach to your testing. So it's like, okay, these test cases don't produce any more bugs. Or like I try to test this part of the game from many different angles. I ran out of ideas. I'm going to move on to something else. Or you might come back to the developer or producer and say, hey, I tested this. To me, it seems that everything is okay. Do you want me to move on a different platform? Do you want me to move on a different part of the game? Is there anything else that you will find crucial for me to test right now? So don't kind of start to make up bugs, or my favorite, when you find one bug, but you split it into 4 different ones just to make up for more numbers. Don't do that. Nobody likes that. Because especially if you have irrelevant bugs, so if you have bugs like that, they can cause lots of tension in the team. Developers start to lose respect for the QA. They kind of see them more as an obstacle than a help, and you don't want that. I also don't use unrealistic scenarios. When you talk about different approach, it means like take the approach that is try to see, okay, how could player do this wrongly, rather than like doing something fantastical, like like the screen shows. I mean, I've seen sometimes people testing like, oh, if I remove my battery from the phone 2 or 3 times in a row and then I restart the game, it takes longer. I was like, how realistically somebody is going to take a battery 2 or 3 times in a row out of their phone and then start to play the game? And then, okay, you find a bug, but is it really relevant? You could probably spend your time doing something else, because there's never enough time to do all of the QA. So if you have extra time in your hands, there's definitely something more efficient you could do. Okay, so a bit about reporting bugs. So bug is the problem which is causing a program to crash or produce some kind of invalid output. So it means something is wrong, something is not as we designed it or imagined it to work. It's perfectly fine to put forward your suggestions. So let's say, because you're testing a lot and you represent the player and there are certain things in the game that you don't like, or you see how they could be done more efficiently, put them forward as a suggestion, or talk to the producer and say, hey, I noticed this and I think it can be done better. Where can I put my suggestions forward? But don't report it as a bug, because nobody's going to like it. And then, your suggestion on how to improve the game is going to end up at coder, who's going to be like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to leave it. So it's end up nowhere. So don't do it. So as I said, check with the producer to find what's the right way to put a suggestion forward. There's always some kind of way that you can put suggestion forward in any team. And if you don't have that way, if you don't have that process built in your team, talk to your producer about possibly building this process, that people who are working on the game can actually give their suggestions. And don't take it personal if it's not taken on board. Of course, it's one thing is that you want to have an option to express your opinion, but it might not necessarily be taken in the game. So there are 2 things. But putting Suggestions for the game as the bugs will definitely not get you anywhere, and said probably won't even be seen by the right person who makes decisions about it. So just make sure that you're really reporting bugs rather than suggestions. And if you report suggestions, report them as suggestions, not as bugs. So, few more things that are really important about reporting bugs. Report them on time, never sit on them. I said this many times, I'm saying it again because it's super important. Please don't do that, even if it might feel more convenient to report 10 bugs at the end of the day. Decide who will report the bugs in your team as well. It's great if you have the whole team participating. Very often it happens that, at the, especially working agile, that towards the end of the sprint, the whole team kind of plays the game. It's great if they help out with the QA and the report, but they have to know how. So you might end up with lots of random reports which are quite hard to read or irrelevant. So if the people are going to report bugs, make sure they know how to report them, or it's better maybe that they report them to the QA person who is going to write the bug reports that are going to be taken further. And if you're using any external testers, make sure that you always do the checks on their reports. You don't necessarily have to check everything all the time, but do the spot checks and make sure that you especially check the critical bugs or blockers, bugs that are reported like that, because in my experience, very often it happens that it's misunderstood and that you might get something reported as a blocker or as a critical bug or showstopper, but then when you actually look into it, the issue is not that bad. So it's not such a big problem, and the tester might have taken it out of context. So make sure that those bugs are always checked before they're assigned for fix, or before we start the alarm with the producer. We are going to be late, with the submissions because we found a showstopper. It might not be so. So make sure that those bugs are checked. All right, here I'm going to show you a couple of actual bug reports. Well, these are sample bug reports, no, not real, but they are built as real would look like. So we are using, this is UTrack. So it's a software where you can, for the project management, for the bug reporting. So this is how it looks like. So this is the name of the bug. So here we see that we follow a specific formula, template, how to make the headline. So these are my initials. This is the platform. It's an iOS. It's an UI. It's an UI of the shop. And the bug is that the bundle items overlap and it can't be purchased. So as soon as you see this headline, it already tells you, okay, this is only an iOS. It was reported by Nicolina, external tester, and this is quite a serious issue because purchases don't work. Preconditions will go to shop so that we know that this is happening in the actual shop, not some other area of the game. Open the shop, check the shop. Expected results, all items are clearly visible and can be purchased. Actual result, bundles overlapping, and when player taps on them, purchase window is not triggered, so nothing happens. If it stays on iPhone 7 Plus, this is the version. So it gets all of this information. And this was put as a priority, as a critical, because it's a shop. So of course, here's no severity, but knowing that anything affecting purchases is really, really important and crucial for the success of the game, tester decided that priority is okay to be critical. Mind you, in situations like this, when you have only priority, as a tester, you will have to decide yourself. But don't get surprised if this is changed by producer or somebody else later, because at the end of the day, it's their final decision. So this critical might go up and or down. Having in mind that this is a shop bug, that the purchases don't work, this is probably not gonna, well, this is the highest one, I don't think it's gonna go down. And of course, here we would have attached screenshot of that. It's a made-up bug, so it's not real. But if we would have to have a screenshot of the part and showing like where is this happening in a game. So this tells you, like for example, how the bug can look like. One thing we don't have here is we don't have affected versions. It says unknown. Because I didn't populate this field. So this is something that in the real world you should have the version here. That should be actually says where have you, on which version of the game you found this bug. And here's this is kind of field usually either assigned by the coder who is working on the bug or producer, where it's decided on which build this fix is going to be committed. So this is not necessarily done by the QA, might be sometimes done by QA manager, but it's generally either coder or producer, depending on how your internal processes work in your team. So this is going to be like, okay, we are targeting this fix for this particular build. As I said, because this is a shop, it's probably going to be done for the next available build going live. Here we have another bug. This is from Jira, so also very popular bug reporting software. So this is a little bit different bug. So here we have, it's also an iOS. It's happening in active levels, so it's levels, and level 25 doesn't display level goal. So here's precondition, we have to reach level 25. So this is, for example, part, if you remember a couple of modules before, we talked about being able to kind of cheat in a game when you test that you can just jump in any level further down in the game. And this would be one of those, because otherwise you would actually have to play to the level 25 to be able to verify this bug. And it might take quite a bit of time, which you can spend more efficient doing something else. So precondition, reach level 25. Step to reproduce, start the level. Second, observe the level goal on the left-hand side of the screen. So here we presume that the level goals are displayed on the left side of the screen. Here this level goal should be clearly shown. Actual result, it's missing, there's only empty space. So it's quite understandable. And again, so we would have a screenshot showing this empty space, like that it's nothing there. Here is the environment. So here we have a special field for environment, so it's listed, so it's iPhone 7, highest version of 13.0.1. So it's in a backlog, so here we see where the bug is, so this means it's just reported, so nobody kind of assigned it yet, it will be fixed. It was reported by me, it was assigned to me, so in the real world should be assigned to somebody else, but sometimes it happens, for example, when coders do the testing themselves, they might report the bug and assign it to themselves to fix. So it affects the version 1.0.1, and I schedule to be fixed in a version 1.0.2. So this will be the next one. And the priority is high because that game is live, and we want this to be fixed because players will be very frustrated if they don't know what's the purpose of that level. So what are they supposed to do to win it? So winning preconditions are not known. So this is another way, for example, how the bug can be reported. So I said these are pretty straightforward. I picked pretty straightforward bugs. They are based on the real bugs that happen in the game. And it gives you a bit of an idea how the bug reports look like, what is important, what we need to pay attention to, and actually how the bugs reporting software look like. So, there are many different bugs databases at Bugzilla. There's Mantis. Oh my God, I can't remember all of them, but there's quite a few. There's one which is quite complex called QC. They usually have some kind of software development tracking. It's a project management tool which has the bug reporting options in it. But they might look different, but they would all have relatively similar fields. So if you learn how to use one, it just takes a bit of practice to get used to it. Generally, they're not too complex to use, especially if you use them only for bugs. All right. So now we know how the bug reports look like. Now we know how to report bugs, which as a QA you will spend most time doing. This is something that when you start your work in a QA, generally you spend about, I would say, maybe 70% testing and then about 30% reporting bugs. So if you're really lucky and if the software is really buggy, it might be even 50-50. But here we have a little task for you to practice what you just learned. So download a game called Math Is It Love and test it. It's free to download on Google Play. It's free to download App Store. And I picked this game because it's quite buggy, so you'll find some bugs pretty soon. And here we don't talk about what you think about the game, do you like it or not. We are talking about find the bugs. Report them using what you learned in this presentation. So, and you can use UTruck, that we just see the sample, or Jira as your bug reporting database. If you just opened it for yourself, it's free. So it's free for up to 10 users. So you can actually open and play around with it and report a bug, make a bug report. Don't forget to add the software version, but you'll have to look for it in the game. So you have to find it yourself, because don't ask developers. We don't know them. We just picked the game, said because it's buggy and it's available everywhere. And do the report, and then compare it with the bug reports that you've seen here, and make sure like how they match. How did you do? So I wish you good luck with your task. I hope you're having fun. And yeah, now you're almost ready. Now you know how to report bugs. One of the most important things that QA does. I hope you found this module useful, and until the next one. Hello and welcome to the module QA methodology and techniques. So here we're going to talk about different techniques, how to actually test certain things, and how can they help us with the more complex tasks, and to make sure that we really choose the right approach to test specific things. So let's begin. Um, Definition of methodology is not really united. What a surprise! Like most of the things in a QA, and especially in a games QA, there's not many unified things. So here, when we talk about methodology, we are talking about a set of methods to how to execute tests. Knowledge of the different QA techniques will help you to select the right approach when you're testing and to optimize your efforts. You can always use different techniques to test something. There is no right or wrong answer, but sometimes some techniques will just help you optimize your time and do things more efficiently. And here I'm going to touch down on some traditional but also modern techniques as well that can help you out in your work. So first I'm going to talk a bit about the risk-based testing. This is something that it's very commonly used, especially when we have a very limited time. So risk-based testing is like a priceless methodology to help you out. It's often done to determine what things to test next, but as I said also, if you have very limited amount of time, you will usually want to focus on the things that are like the riskiest things in the game. So here we prioritize testing in terms of probability that some feature will fail and the probable cost of failure. So for example, there are many ways to do the risk analysis, but you know, coming from just talking to your team to doing more complex risk analysis of the software. But it's basically, for example, let's say that we did some significant changes in the shop and it wasn't really tested before. The coder is not 100% sure that everything works as intended, and if the shop is broken, we are going to lose lots of money. So we will consider this being a high risk item, so something that it's really important to work properly, and if it fails, it's going to have quite catastrophic consequences for the game and possibly for the studio. So the greater the probability of an expensive failure, it's more important to test that feature as early and as carefully as possible. And I said, if there's a limited amount of time, this is something that you're definitely going to pay attention to. So when we study a feature, we should ask ourselves how it can fail. What would the failure look like? In our case, for example, shop is not working, meaning players will not spend any money. And why should this feature fail? What risks are likely to have affected this feature? And we know, for example, that the coder did significant changes with the in the code of the shop, and that she didn't feel confident that everything is going to work as intended. So this is just very simple, obvious example, but I just want to show you how in the real world um, how it would be imported. Another thing that we can look, for example, is that if the game is live and we announce the new multiplayer features, like okay, now you can, for example, have clans, which you couldn't do before. It was just a single player game. So the players are very excited about it. You made lots of marketing campaigns about it on your social media. So, but of course, because you're adding all of this new system in your game that was not there before, there is a chance that this could not really work, that could be problematic. So this would be considered a high risk ticket, that it would be very disappointing for the players if it doesn't work. It could even cause some loss of reputation for you as a development studio. But because it's a new feature and it's huge and it involves lots of work and lots of new code, there's a quite high risk that something is wrong here. So that should be thoroughly tested. So I hope this gives you an idea how risk-based testing can be used in a games QA. Then we have exploratory testing, which is used quite often, and it's a powerful and kind of fun approach to testing as well. I like to think about it as a scientific thinking in a real time. So here you're doing things hands-on, and there's not much planning involved, and it's really focused on the test execution. It's really focused on testing. You will create something called a test charter, which is really just a declaration of like what are you going to test, what are you going to focus on, what are you trying to achieve, and what the possible approaches you're going to do. So we mentioned multiplayer, for example, so you can say, okay, we are going to test multiplayer for the next 2 hours. We're going to have a group of like 4 testers, and we are going to try to prove that we can send gifts to other members in the guild, and that we can if we can participate in the guild events. Let's say something like that. It was very simplified, but something like that. So a good exploratory tester will write down some test ideas, so you will learn something from it, and then just take them as a script. You can use them in the later test cycles. So even if they can look like a test scripts, even if they aren't, but they will really help you. So keep them for the future testing rounds. And here we expect tester to learn about the product and the market and risk and the ways that it has failed in previous tests. And exploratory testing is sometimes confused with the ad hoc testing, but there is actually a slight difference. Ad hoc testing is much more improvised, so it's really impromptu. So we like take something and we really try to find, okay, let's see if we can find something wrong. Exploratory testing, it's a bit more focused. So we would usually say, okay, we are going to do exploratory testing on this new feature, on this part of the game. Then we have something called guerrilla testing, which is kind of considered being a fast attack on the game. It's also a form of exploratory testing, and it's usually done in a specific amount of time, and it's done generally by experienced tester. So you will spend some time testing the area that is otherwise ignored, or it's not tested often. I like to say here things, for example, like settings, because very often people forget to test settings, or maybe some kind of part of the game which is not part of the core gameplay progression, but somewhere on the side in a meta game, something like that. So if the tester, if she finds some significant problems in that area, it might mean that this area is going to be rebudgeted, and the test plan might be affected. So here it's more like a finding mission, saying, okay, this area to me seemed very unstable. I think that we have to dedicate more testing to this because I found some serious issues. If you find no problems, this part of the game in the future might be only lightly tested, just touch down on it. So this is another example, and what's specific to guerrilla testing is that we are really using this kind of aggressive methods, that we are really trying to break the game and think out of the box how we can break it. And then there's something called scenario testing, and that would usually involve 4 different attributes. First, that scenario testing, that it must be realistic. It should reflect something that player would do. So even if I often say to be creative, if it's too creative, if it's something that would be very rarely done in a real life, there's no value in that. I've seen kind of scenario testing where it was like, okay, take phone battery out, turn on the phone, turn off the phone, put battery in, battery out. I was like, realistically, this might happen once in a blue moon. It's not going to be a test case that's going to tell us anything useful. The test should be more complex. It should involve several features, and it should be challenging for the game. So we don't use scenario testing for simple tests. It should be very easy and to tell if the game passed or failed this test. And if this test is passed, you should be failed. You should be able to argue about it. That should be fixed. You would have you should be able to use this as a good ammunition to prove your point. If you make scenario tests with these attributes, will be very persuasive, and you will probably, if you find any bugs with this type of scenario tests, they will yield bug fixes. But these kind of tests are not that easy to make, and they require quite a bit of thinking, and sometimes they are easy to do for some features, but not necessarily for the other ones. So generally we talk about scenario testing like this with these attributes. These are usually done by more senior testers or even QA managers who are quite experienced, or somebody who has been testing this game for a longer time. Now I'm going to talk about equivalence partitioning, which is a very fancy name for something that is actually really simple. We learned by now that it's not practical, and it's really not even possible to cover all possible permutations in the game or in any software. And here in this technique, it's basically about dividing the test conditions into partitions that can be considered the same, so grouping things. And that means that it's sufficient to test only one value from that partition, and that's enough because that test will represent all the other values in this partition. It's used a lot for data testing, and it's very simple to say partitions are generally valid or invalid. And here, for example, we can test any values in a game, for example, game economy data and things like that. Picture says the 100 words, so this is what we were looking for example. This, mind you, can't be used for everything, but it can be used anything which is related to some kind of numbers or number input. So here I use the example of the soft currency values. So we would consider that the valid number of soft currency is 0, meaning you have nothing, to 1 billion. If it's more than 1 billion, it will not be able to be displayed in our user interface. So any number between 0 and 1 billion would be valid for testing. So of course we won't test soft currency for I have 1 coin, 2 coin, 3 coin, you just pick one. What would be considered invalid? It's anything that's negative, so from -1 onwards, or anything that's bigger from 1 billion. So it's very simple to understand, and it's like very easy to use when you're dealing with anything numeric. Related to equivalence partitioning, we have something called boundary value analysis. So here, as the word says, you're testing the boundaries between the partitions. So we are testing these borderline areas. Because why are we doing this? Because there are actually some statistical indicators that show that bugs would most often occur in these borderline areas. And that's a generally very good rule of thumb, that the bugs very often show up in a software in any kind of borderline areas towards the end of the game, when one thing is morphing into another one. And these are always the areas that, if you have extra time, to maybe focus a bit of your testing efforts there. One thing important is that you should always test both valid and invalid boundary. And boundary value analysis can also be called range checkings because you're checking the specific range. And of course, these two are very often used together. So to make it more easier to grasp, here's our soft currency values. So here is the picture. So we would usually test here and here because the most probable bugs are going to happen here. So what happens, you know, that if you have a one coin and you try to spend 3, will you get -1? Or you should, or can you be even able to spend -3? So you would say this doesn't happen, but actually quite a few times in a game it happens that you can go into negative currency, and it should never be the case. It's the same with the time as well. If you have a timer should end at 0. It should not necessarily go into the negative time unless it's the function of the game, which rarely makes sense, but you know, it's a creative field. Maybe some game there is something called negative time. And it's the same here, that we should try to purchase soft currency when we have like 1 billion coins. What will happen? So this is a very good test case, like what should be happen here? And you might say, well, nobody's going to get 1 billion currency. They shouldn't. That's why limit, it should be very, very high. But he said these days we are making free-to-play games which are supposed to last for years, if not even decades. And when you have somebody who plays the game for 5, 6, 10 years, it's hard to say how much soft currency they can pile up, you know. So I would say it's not a completely useless test. All right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about decision tables. Decision tables can be taken as something which is very complex or something that is very simple. They should be used to model very complicated logic. So this is where we have lots of possible permutations that can be taken into account. And conditions in the decision table are generally expressed as true or false. And then you will have different columns that will correspond to a rule in the business logic, and it will describe unique combinations of circumstances, what will happen if you combine these elements. This is very good when you, for example, have different equipment, different weapons. You can upgrade them, you can add different things to it. If you have combination of weapons, shields, outfits, bullets, vehicles, you know, any kind of things that you can heavily combine and where you have significant freedom in how you can combine them or equip on your character or on your item in the game. So one of the advantages of using these decision tables that it makes it possible to detect the combinations of conditions that would otherwise be very hard to figure out, because this is something that's really hard to do manually in your head. And of course, there's generally some optimal combination of items that players should strive to do. But as we spoke before, players are a creative bunch and they like to use things in a different ways. And decision table helps us kind of map all the possible permutations of how something can be used and combined. And decision table can also be used actually quite early in the game design as well, because the requirement become much clearer and it's much easier to realize that some requirement might be illogical. It should be very hard to see if you actually don't put it in the table. There's of course some disadvantages about decision tables. They don't equalize the complete test case scenario. So if you don't know what it is, the decision table can look very confusing. You just open something and you're like, okay, I don't know what's the head of tail of this. What do I do with this? How do I test this? And decision tables can be used in situations where the outcome depends on combination of different choices. So they're best used during the system designs because they are useful to both developers and testers, but like they're not test cases by themselves. There should be a little bit of description saying like, okay, what to do with this decision table. I actually have an example of it. So this is one of the examples. For example, this is obviously about weapons and damage, and it's mapped here in one type of the decision table. You might wonder how this table should look like. Literally, there's no rules. Anything which would have columns, and rows, it's considered a table and can be made into decision table. So it really depends on the team and people who are working with them. So whatever is useful for a team and makes sense, that would be the decision table. So no strict rules about how they should be made. A bit of tips on how to deal with the new code. Very often can happen that you will get a new code and the time is limited. So what to do, how to organize your testing. First, start your testing with a mainstream level test. So here, test again with something that's easy to pass, and it will be taken as a serious problem if these tests fail. So something like we'll put in our BAT, in the basic acceptance testing. So these are the ones that we start with. Second, test broadly rather than deeply. If you have limited time, you want to try to test as many different areas of the game as possible rather than focusing only on one thing. Check all the different parts of the feature or all the different parts of the game quickly before you decide to focus on something else. Look for more powerful tests. But after the game passed this easy test, then you look for more complex things. So start from the simple and move towards more complex. Pick what your boundary conditions are. Focus on the things that are important and where where you might find the most bugs. So like these boundary areas are always the good places to look for. And try to do some exploratory testing. Run your tests every week, and see how the things are changing. See if there's anything new. See if there's anything suspicious. So focus on the new areas and focus on the areas where there were some most significant changes. And if you would like to learn more about the things that can help you in prioritize your testing, I recommend reading about the Pareto principle. And also there is a bit more here about equivalence partitioning in practice. So these are quite common things that are used in testing, and you can find much more resources if you are interested in going more in depth about these methodologies. So thank you very much for being with us in this module, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello again, and welcome to the module about testing approach. So here we are going to talk about strategical approach to testing, how to approach it, and what to focus on, when and how. Now, this is something that very often would fall into the lap of your QA manager, who is actually going to kind of give you this information. But in the smaller teams, or if you work in external QA, very often you are on your own with this and you have to make some solid calls yourself. So I would say this is really good to know, even if you're just a junior. And of course, if you have ambition to go to the QA management, this will really help you to understand like the bigger picture of testing. So let's begin. So generally, unfortunately, in the gaming industry, generally there is not so much awareness about testing approach. It's really mostly test everything a lot, like just play the game and put more people on it. And even if it gives results, sometimes we miss very important things because we didn't have maybe planned strategy on how to actually test. So it finds lots of bugs, and then some of them are found when it's too late. That means when the game is already live and we have a complaining players that, hey, this is not working. And also games are generally tested when they're considered being ready. And that's usually quite late in development cycles. So it's always towards the end, just before the submissions, just before the game goes out. And then there's lots of pressure on the testers to do lots of coverage, to test the whole big areas of the game in a short period of time. And of course, so much pressure always leads to crunch. People have to work extra hours. That leads to mistakes. Very often team problems as well, that people are a little bit more on the edge when they work under such a pressure for prolonged periods of time. And there could be major issues that kind of fall through the cracks, and there might be even delays in deliveries. So it's a very stressful time, and there's lots of responsibility on the QA, and it's not the best way to do the QA. But unfortunately, it's a very common practice. It's very common to approach game testing like that. So simply, what does it mean? Test strategy is like what to test and when. So to make that decision. And it's probably, as a tester, it's one of the most important decisions you're going to make. Of course, the easiest answer here is like everything needs to be tested. Yeah, well, yes, in ideal world, of course. But in practice, taking into account everything we know now, it's not really possible. So everything tested, it's just to be, this kind of test, overall test, are supposed to be maybe once or twice in the product life cycle. It's not something that's done commonly. But a good QA lead should know what needs to be tested when. And this can be learned, but also sometimes comes with experience as well. Usually, the longer you work with a team and longer you work with a product, you will also get a better sense of what needs to be tested as when. Base QA, it's always embedded and continuous. In the long run, it's the cheapest. Even if it might seem counterproductive, why would you have a QA early in the team? But if you continuously test your software, you will find the most serious problems early on when there's much less stress to fix them. And because the cost of fixing big bugs later in development, it's much higher. And it's also going to be less stressful for the team. But to have a QA working efficiently like this, you will need to have a good QA lead or QA person who can choose the right testing approach. Because also we can look from the reverse. If you put unexperienced QA too early in the product cycle, they will report lots of irrelevant bugs because software is not ready yet to be tested. So of course you might just have one part of the game that you want to have tested at a time. But if your QA is too eager or doesn't really understand the development process, they might report, 30 bugs that, well, we know that this is not working because we didn't implement it. It's too early in the game development. So it's an approach that if it's taken, it has to take into account the QA who does the QA at different phases, really understands what's the priority and when something should be tested. So most of the game development and software development these days is agile. The previous version of what was used before agile is actually a system called waterfall. So here is the graph on this slide. You can see it about how the waterfall really looks like. So with the testing and verification. So starting with the code, first was the unit testing. This is where we were testing really, it's testing done by coders. It's not really done by the QA team. After that, it's going to integration testing, when we're actually testing what has been integrated into the game, into the software. System testing, this is where we actually put different systems into the game. At the end, user acceptance testing. This is where we test from the user perspective and see, does this game pass like the user test, like would it be, we put ourselves in the player perspective. Simplified. Here in the middle, we see documentation, which usually follows these phases. and what things that we actually test against. But as I said, these days there are elements of this approach that are still applicable in Agile, but we don't do testing anymore like that most of the time. But we still will use the milestones. So the names of the milestones, you probably heard the expression system testing, user acceptance testing, unit testing. So these milestones are here to stay, and we still use the same terminology, but it might not mean exactly the same what it used to mean in waterfall, or it's not necessarily done in the same time. So a little bit more about embedded QA. Usually it's understood as, oh, we have this QA guy who is permanent to our team, so he's here to test when we have something to test. In reality, what it really means is that QA is the big part in all phases of the software development. That means that we actually have a QA available even in the early stages of the development, and the QA's focus is going to shift depending on how the progress of the software development goes. What is the difference? Having a permanent QA guy means that we just have somebody who is there, but it doesn't really tell what role this QA person has. It could also be that we just have a QA guy who is going to be testing towards the end of the testing of the development cycle, so that nothing really changes. And in Agile, there's lots of changes, and changes are happening all the time, and it's much more fast-paced working environment. And here QA needs to embrace that constant change, and you have to plan QA a bit differently in your testing activities. You can't rely on very complex and very firm and rigid QA plans, because honestly, you will have to change them all the time and they will become irrelevant. So there is a need to have a different approach, to have continuous critical thinking, to try to think out of the box, to follow up what's happening in the team, what is happening with the software. And you need to communicate more with your teammates as well. You need to communicate more with your game designer, with your developers, with the producer. So it's slightly different work, because before, when QA was done only towards the end of the game development, this is the time a QA could work pretty much independently, just asking questions here and there. But embedded QA, it's much more engaged with the rest of the team. So to help you out, because it might sound really complicated, to help you out, I kind of made the comparison between the milestones, the game development milestone, and what to focus on. Mind you, every company might use different names for their milestones. So I will explain what I mean by these names here, but please take this with a grain of salt, because as I said, like they're used slightly differently depending on the developer you're working with, on which platform they work, or just the way how they do things. So let's begin. Pre-production, it's the early period of game development. We are still figuring out like how we're gonna lay down things, and the team here is smaller, and there's still lots of back and forth going on, and this is kind of the time where there's most of experimentation is still going on. Usually in this stage, we know what kind of game we are making. We usually know what our timeline is. Usually we know, we have ideas about the main features of the game, but there's lots of still things that need to be figured out and can be changed. So what do we do? What do we test here? This is the period that QA has the least work, let's put it that way, but there's still lots of things that can be tested. So for example, you can read through the user stories and see, do they make sense for the player perspective? You can check to the scalability of the game. Does the proposed architecture scale enough to support the gameplay? Are there any flaws in the game design logic? Some things might not really logically work or connect well. Is the game architecture sound? So these are some of the things that we can look into these early stages. And how do we do that? Because very often here you will not have something to test. It's really through looking through the documents, reading them, having decision tables, and checking out if if there is any design flaws or something missing or makes no sense. So it's kind of like the hands-on work would be much more going through the documentation and talking with people rather than actually testing builds. You might get some working builds as well, but they would also generally be just focused on testing one or two things. They would not be ready to have overall testing or user acceptance testing or things like that. The next big milestone we have is alpha. With alpha, I mean, this is where it's feature complete, so that all main features of the game are implemented. So here, what we can start to test is actually the core gameplay. So we can see, does it work? We can also have a look at the fun factor. So does the core game seems fun? Is it engaging? And is it stable? Is the game actually stable? Are there any serious issues in the game stability or like, is there any crashes and things like that? Now, how do we test here? Generally, we just do it on a couple of selected devices. Usually it's one, which we call principal testing device. And this is something that you will be quickly checking on this device specific things. And sometimes you also use emulators in some places. After that, we have beta. Here as a master, we mean it's also content complete. So it's a feature complete, but it's also content complete. So we kind of have most of the gameplay already implemented. So here we start to do, this is where the most work for QA comes. So here we kind of test very wide. We will test UI and UX, we'll test the game flow, we will test the stability, but we are also going to start testing first-time user experience, tutorial, monetization, shop, coverage on the devices and the platform. Compliance with the platforms. So here is what we start to look into all of that. And we test it on a wide range of devices. So here we kind of take a little bit more from our selected core device or principal device, and we start to test on our test sets. RC, it's an old master means release candidate. It comes from the console games. Here it would mean it's the game when a game is ready to be globally launched. That means that we already even had a soft launch and the game is ready to be presented to the global audiences. So here what we are testing before releasing the game to the world is the game balancing. This is where we test localization. So if we had a game translated in any additional languages, we test those. We look at the game polish. We look at how does the shop works and the purchases. And we also, again, we check the coverage. And we also will check any compliances as well with the platform and the operating system. And we test this on the supported devices, on the range of supported devices. You will see there's a difference between on beta and RC, because in beta we say wide range of devices. And on RC we say supported devices. So I guess that you can see it here. Why is it different? Because here we might actually test on the devices where the game doesn't even work, but we won't know that it doesn't work until it's tested. So here we might test on a way more devices than here, because here we'll already decide what are the devices we support and we're going to test only on those. But in this stage, we will actually figure out as well on which devices game doesn't work. So these devices might be blacklisted, or we might even cut off some support for some lower versions of the operating system. So hence the difference. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is great. Our game is out, but we are here talking mostly about mobile free-to-play games. So how do we do this test strategy in a live production? We actually have a separate module which talks only about that, so how to do the QA in live operations. But here just a bit of flavor of how is it done. Generally, we have to do numerous regression rounds. So that we will retest things over, because every time we add something to the game, it might affect the other parts of the game. Here's also very important to be talking with the coders, because if you run the same test over and over, eventually they will run out of steam, they will wear out. That means you will stop finding bugs with them. And it's really important when you communicate with your development team to actually tell you, because they'll give you an insight of what they changed and how they changed it. So it might give you an idea of what to focus on in a game. So there's no shame in asking. So questions that you can ask them is, did you change anything significant in the code? Does the new feature affect the old one? Does it? Do you think it's going to affect performance? Do you think it might affect loading, frame rate per second? Would you like us to test something specific? The closer you work with your team, the closer you work with developers, you will be getting better results. You will be able to get a better focus and really help each other out. But of course, sometimes it happens that even if you have best intention, that developers might not be willing to help. But then you can also talk to the producer, because producer is going to have a very good idea of what has been done. So don't be afraid to ask. Then, of course, we have integration rounds where we're integrating new software. And here you have to just use your brain and your experience and think from the player point of view. Well, how would this feature affect the old one? What could be broken? And also, how well does it fit and feel within the game ecosystem? Is it something which is maybe too far-fetched that doesn't really fit in? So it's up to QA to look into these things as well. And always remember, coders are usually focused on that things work. So very often coders will be like, well, this technically works, but they will not necessarily look into, does it fit? Is it fun? How does it feel in the ecosystem of the game? But QA roles is to represent the player and to make sure that actually the game design also feels and plays as intended, not only from the technical point of view, but also from the player's point of view. And often it happens that the features are designed that would look great as a standalone feature, but when you integrate them in the game, they might be much less exciting. But this is something, again, it's up to QA to play it and to give the recommendations and say, hey, this is what we think that about this feature. This is how it fits in the rest of the game. And so with that, you would need a little bit of experience or maybe guidance from the QA manager to really help you to decide on these things, because it's sometimes hard to be objective as well, and we always have to try to be as objective as possible so that we represent the player, not ourselves. Okay, so a bit about black box and white box testing. So maybe you heard this terminology before. Black box testing is the testing which is usually done by the QA. It means that you don't have access to the code and you don't have the knowledge of the code. You won't see the code. You will just see the output of it. While white box testing, it's actually when you test the code. Honestly, white box testing should really be called see-through box testing. It kind of indicates that you can see the code. So types of white box testing are code review and technical reviews, and this is what's done by the development team, while QA does the black box testing. So this is all the testing which doesn't require testing the code itself. Why we're talking about this? Because even if the QA doesn't do white box testing, it's good to be aware of white box testing practices. Ask for the results, ask for the summary of the white box testing, because it will also help you to narrow down your testing focus. Even if you don't get a document, just having a chat with the lead developer will help you understand if they found anything concerning or what you should pay attention while they were doing the white box testing rounds. So, what is the test strategy? It means that we plan to cover how do we plan to cover the product and to develop adequate assessments of quality. It's a mouthful. It's really planning to see, like, okay, how are we gonna test this to make sure that it does what's supposed to do? And the good test strategy is product specific, it's risk focused, it's diversified, and it's practical. So we're gonna go a little bit deeper into this. First, I'm going to present it's a heuristic test strategy model, which might look a bit simple, but then misleading. And it consists of several different things that are actually affecting your test techniques. So we are going to go a little bit in depth about it. It's actually a very simple and common sense model, which is going to be very helpful when you're planning your test strategy. So the project environment includes these are the resources, constraints, and other elements that might help you do the testing. Sometimes you must challenge them, and sometimes you might accept them. So for example, that might be, they say, hey, you have one tester to test this. And you might say, well, this is not really enough. I think if I want to test multiplayer, I need at least 4 people. You might challenge that, and sometimes the answer is just gonna be no. Product elements are things that you intend to test. So software is very complex. The games can be very complex as well, and you should take care that you cover everything that's important in a game, not just the obvious things. So it's not only about the level progression or playthrough. There are lots of other parts of the game that needs to be covered as well, and we spoke more about it earlier in the different modules. Quality criteria are the rules and values and sources that will allow you to determine if the software has a problem. It's also called the testing oracle, and said sometimes they are hidden or self-contradictory. Sometimes it's not obvious if it's working as it should or not. And we spoke about this more, especially when talking about bugs module. You can see examples of that, like how can bug be misunderstood or even disputed. Test techniques are heuristic for creating tests, and all techniques would involve some sort of analysis of the environment, of the elements, and the quality criteria. So we are looking in all of that to actually decide on our test techniques. And perceived quality is the result of the testing. So this is when we execute testing, we can say, we believe that this software is pretty mature, it's going to work well. We can never really 100% actually know the exact quality, but that's why I say perceived quality, because we can never really finish testing. But so we can say through the process of testing that its perceived quality is good or excellent or poor. And we make this decision based on the tests we develop and the number of bugs we found and how the software performs. So it's relatively simple, complex. We just have to take into account all of the different things that affect the testing techniques and the output of perceived quality. And then there's another system as well, which is called five-fold testing system, which kind of talks about 5 different dimensions of testing. Any testing you do can be described in terms of 5 different dimensions. And usually testing techniques will focus attention on 1 or maybe 2 dimensions, but the others are open to the judgment. And this kind of gives you an idea to combine few of these different dimensions, because that will going to help you achieve the results that you want. So here are the 5 dimensions. It's testers, like who does the testing? For example, user testing is a focus on testing by the members of your target market, or players who would normally play a game. User testing can also sometimes be beta testing, might be the same thing. Or is it being done by your senior testing team? Is it going to be done by external QA team that you never worked on before? So this is one of the dimensions. Who is performing the testing? Who is behind it? Then there's coverage. What gets tested? For example, localization. We are going to test implementation of different languages. We are testing playthrough. We are testing multiplayer. So this is the coverage of like what gets tested. Then potential problems. Here's the question is like, why are we testing? So what is the risk that we are testing for? For example, testing for loading time duration using the Wi-Fi connection. So this is the reason why we are testing. activities. So how you test? So are we doing exploratory testing? Are we doing pairwise testing? How are we going to execute our test cases? And evaluation. So how do we tell that the test is passed and failed? So I said, with using this fivefold testing system, if you combine a few different dimensions, you might get much better results. As said, so like here's some examples. Somebody might ask you to do the feature testing. It's a new feature we are putting in a game, so we have to thoroughly test it. That means they'll tell you what to test. You're testing the new feature. But you still have to decide, okay, whom you're going to assign on this task. Because you might have a bigger team of testers, and some people might be just better than the others in doing this type of tests, or some people just might not be available. What types of bugs are you looking for? How are you going to test each aspect of this feature? And how are you going to decide, did this feature pass or did it fail? Another example, for example, if you decide to do the closed beta testing. Closed beta testing means that you will have external representatives of your market to test the software. In practice, that means that you're going to have access to the early build of your game to some selected potential players of your game. If you are listening to this and you're a gamer yourself, you probably encounter closed beta testing in games yourself. You might have even participated in some of them. Now, this will tell you who is going to do the testing. So we know that there's going to be selected group of players who are going to test this game. But you still have to decide what to tell them about the game. So what do you want them to test, what parts of the game to look for, and what problems they should look for, and what problems they should ignore, because they are not ready. You might not want to tell them anything and kind of just take it as exploratory session, but you might want to give testers some warning saying, hey, this is not implemented yet, this is not working, how can you focus on this? Or you can even just turn off the features that are not ready yet and not show them in those builds. So if you keep those 5 dimensions in mind as you test, you will just make better choices, and you will get much better results of your strategy, because you're just going to have a much better picture of how the things work, and taking into account everything you need to get the optimized output. I almost said perfect, but we learned by now in a QA, there's not perfect. There's just good enough is what we are striving for. So thank you for being with me through this module. I hope you learned something useful, and I'll see you on the next one. Hello, and welcome to the lecture about QA and live ops. I'm actually quite excited about this one. I think that QA and live ops is super important. It's something that's not taught enough or discussed enough. And it can be in itself about, course in itself, that we could definitely make about 10 lectures just diving into this. Of course, in this particular module, we are going to touch down on the main parts of the doing QA and live ops, what's important, what to pay attention to. And who knows, if there's a demand, maybe next course is going to be just about QA and live ops. But let's begin with this one. So, what is live ops? You will find lots of definitions because it really depends on from which angle you are looking at it. But in reality, live ops are actually all the activities you do with your software, in this case with the game, when it's live, so post-launch. And in mobile free-to-play world, QA never really ends. If you have a premium game, they are more or less like a closed ecosystem. They have a beginning at the end and the end, and QA stops when the game is actually launched. So it was QA was deemed unnecessary after the game was shipped. Maybe there was some need to test a little bit of an updates afterwards, but reality was that when you had a premium game, box games, the QA ends when the game development ends, when the game is shipped, it's in the stores. So with the free-to-play games, this is not the case. This is not the case. Even if the free-to-play game is just moderately successful, it will need to be kept frequently updated. That means anything, not only not only the bug fixes, but also new, fresh content, new features, updates to keep up with the changes on the platform. So actually, lots of work. So I said QA in free to play never really ends. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. Here's one of the examples about why live ops are important and what can happen if the things go wrong. Here we're talking about one of the very popular games on mobile. It was based on the very, very famous cartoon, The Simpsons. I think that everybody in the world probably heard about the Simpsons. So there's a game based on them called Tapped Out. And this is the game which was super popular on mobile. I played it myself. It made over $150 million. It made lots of money. It's a free-to-play game. But when it was launched in March of 2012. It went straight to top 10, but then the servers crashed. The servers couldn't hold the load of the gameplay. And it was offline for 168 days after this initial success because it had to be kind of remade in many ways to be fixed, to be actually working. And estimated that it lost about 27 million in revenues. But after that was relaunched, and then it was top grossing game for nearly 3 years. And during its lifetime, it was updated more than 45 times. And so that's not even that much. It can be way more than that because when you're looking in the more recent years, in the last let's say 5 years, the updates are way more frequent. But this is just one of these big examples with the big games. What can happen when the live ops go wrong or when the QA might not be done in a way that it's the optimal way, and how much damage it can cause. So let's go and see how to do it right. So here are some of the differences between how we do the QA in development and how we do it in live ops. So this is kind of high level comparison, but just to give you an idea. So generally, when we're doing QA during the development time, before the game goes live, we check everything. While in live ops, we have updates which are generally scheduled for about every 2 weeks, once per week, maybe once per month, but they're very frequent. You don't have time to check everything, and there's honestly no need to check everything. So you check mostly what's changed in that particular release. In development, in theory, you should have enough time. There should be enough time scheduled for QA. Now, we all know in reality that's not the case, but we plan to have enough time. With live ops, there's limited time. Regardless what changes are made, there's always limited time because just of the nature of the live ops, the updates are regular. They said there's usually a cadence of doing them weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. And this is your time not only to the development, but also to do the QA. During the game development, most of the time we'll use test cases. With live ops, very often there are no test cases. There's just no time to write them. So you will have maybe some sort of documentation, but it's going to be pretty light. or when we do the game development, QA kind of increases towards the end of the development. Then when the more mature and polished the game is, so then we kind of QA more. But in live ops, the QA is more or less continuous. There's very little breaks in ongoing QA. Also, when we are doing game development, we usually go for the full regressions, but live ops, it's only partial one. I would argue this, that in development you can do the QA work alone. It can be done, and very often it's separated from the team. But in live ops, it's almost impossible to do QA if you're not part of the team. It's just there's so many inputs and so many changes, and you are working with so many different parts of your team and organization that it's really very, very difficult, if not impossible. In development time, we kind of focus on being more thorough. We go really in depth. While in live ops, we have to be quick. We have to know how to prioritize what to test and what to put our focus on. And when we do game development, we do the QA, then we actually don't know how players going to behave. We don't know how they're going to interact with the features and items in the game. But in live ops, we know exact players' patterns. Not only that we have analytics in the game, which measure how players behave in a game, but we also have ongoing feedback from the customer support or different forums from player support, and we know what players want and how they behave. So how are we doing the QA in live ops? I think it's important to make a differentiation that when we make updates for live ops, they can usually be done in two different ways. One is that we submit our update to the App Store, to the platform, to be approved and implemented. And the other way is that we have a backend push so that we can actually implement changes in our game without submitting to the platform, that they can be done from our own team. Important thing, both of these need to be tested. So of course, it's kind of a no-brainer that you have to test something which is going for submissions. But sometimes when we make the pushes from the backend, QA skipped. This very often happens, for example, if you are very often the game balancing will be done from the backend, that there will some values will be changed, and the game is going to become a little bit easier or harder, or some characters are going to be more buffed than the other ones. And very often designers will not actually include QA in testing this, and then we might have a problem. In my personal experience, I worked a lot with live ops. We had the worst disasters when we did the backend deploys and we didn't do it. We didn't do even limited QA. I can tell you we had some serious problems. Okay, so we know now this is the dangerous part. This is where to keep our attention on. So how to do the QA on the backend deploy? Firstly, you have to have reliable environment for testing. So you want to test to an environment that is as close as possible to the live environment. Otherwise, your testing is not going to be that precise. And this is the part where you will need the help from your team, especially from your development team, to provide you with this testing environment. You should also talk to the development team and with your producer and make it obligatory that any update, regardless of how is it submitted, should go through QA, but also don't hold it a hostage. Don't make it too thorough for very small changes. In every team which works in live ops should have what we call rollback procedure. That means that if it's something seriously wrong with your update, and if it goes to the live environment and it breaks something, that we actually have a procedure in place where we can instantly or almost instantly remove that update from the live environment and replace it with the previous version that is proven to work. If you don't have this procedure, you might end up in a situation that you will submit an update, everything is going to be broken, and you will have to literally fix things on the go, and your game might be blocked for not hours, but days, sometimes even weeks, and you don't want to be in that situation. So if your team has rollback procedure, hopefully they have a rollback procedure. Make sure that you also understand how it works, how fast it acts, how easy it is to do, and what is the process about it. It's really important here to work together with your development team, especially your backend team, not against them. The more you work together, the more you collaborate and help each other out. This is going to be easier for everybody involved, and you're going to just have a better quality output. And it does pay off to understand common risks for your game. So every game architecture has its weak points. There is no common rule for that. It really depends on how the game was developed, and what genre you are and how big it is. So to work together with your development team to really understand what's a common risk for your game. Then you'll be able to utilize your time in the best possible manner, and you will contribute to the team and success of the game in a best possible way. Okay, now we spoke a bit about the backend and backend pushes to the live environment, but how to do QA on the new features. Every so often you will get new features for the live games, and here you have to make sure that you understand the new feature completely, but also how it's going to affect the existing features in the game. This is particularly important if your game is live for a really long time. If you have the game which is live for 5, 6 years or more, and it becomes quite complex, it's really important to understand if you're adding something new, especially if it's not added at the end of the game, but it's added somewhere in the middle or in the beginning, it's going to impact lots of older features. It might even impact first-time user experience. So make sure you understand how this new feature is going to impact existing features and the game overall. Uh, Also, will this feature somehow affect the game performance, loading time, build size? Depending on how is it implemented, it depends what kind of feature it is. It can affect any of these, and you might have to retest all of this again with the new feature. Will this feature affect game balancing, monetization? Will it make some old features obsolete, or will it make them less fun, or will it confuse players? And will it affect tutorial, first-time user experience? Is it easy to understand? So these are all of the questions that you will need to ask yourself when the new feature comes for testing. So make sure that you understand how the feature works, talk with the game designer, try to figure out what was the purpose of this feature, how it should impact the player, what's desired outcome, and then test it according to the information that you got. And I said no two features are alike, so whatever worked maybe for a previous feature, new one might be different. So make sure that you always do your research. Now I'm going to talk just a bit about the change control, because this is not something that's necessarily in control on the QA hands. As a live environment, it's very dynamic. It's not beneficial to have very tight change control. There's lots of things happening in a live environment. You will get constant feedback from the players, and sometimes you want to have an option to change things really fast and on the go. But on the other hand, if you don't have any change control system, you will end up with releases that will not be properly tested. Very often happen, let me just fix this one small bug just before we submit, and then something happens, and then you thought this is the build you tested, but it's not. It's actually the build that had a small fix, but coder who was committing this fix, he maybe didn't do it on the right branch, or he made it on a different branch, and here you go, you will have a problem that you didn't even know you have. As a rule of thumb, it's always good that you slowly increase the control the closer you get to the submissions to the platform. And choose progressively more conservative set of freeze rules. So you can first freeze parts of the game before you do the full code freeze. This is very different from the premium games. As I said, sometimes it's not even possible to do the complete freeze of the code, and changes will be done in the last minute, and then you just have to hope for the best. And there are ways how to handle that as well. We're going to talk about it here. But just make sure to understand that if you have an option to do some kind of code freeze, do it, because you want to make sure that the build that's going live passed at least some kind of basic acceptance testing, and that everything what's new in this build has been tested. And a little bit about live bugs. Now they happen. And even with the best QA and with the best efforts, they always happen. So how to find them and how to handle them. One thing that it's too often skipped and should always be done after your update is live. Always do at least basic live testing. Test what you did what you did, tested before in a test environment. Now just test it immediately in a live environment. You really don't want to hear from the players saying like everything is broken, it's not working. If you can be the one who finds it first, you will save up some pain to your team, and you will prevent some money loss as well. When the live bug is found, so when you find it, assess first how widespread it is and how serious it is, because sometimes it might just happen on a very limited amount of devices, or it's like, or it can be on a very specific part of the game. And I said it's a bit different if you have a graphical glitch or if your game is constantly crashing. If you reach level 3, they will have a different way. These bugs would have a different effect. Raise that bug immediately with the team. Usually it's the live producer who's going to decide what to do with these live bugs. Should we do some patching? Should we do some hot fixes? Are we doing the rollback of the whole update? So immediately talk to the live producers and say, hey, I found this in a live environment. What should we do? Do it immediately. Don't sit on it. Sometimes with live bugs, it's better to have a false alarm than no alarm at all. I don't mean here calling people at 2 a.m. if you're not sure that something is horribly wrong. But if you're testing during the working hours and you see something seems really bad in the live environment, talk about it immediately. Don't wait for somebody else to confirm that this is happening, or the players confirm this is happening. As soon as you find it, just talk to your producer and try to understand why the bug is happening and what we can learn from it. Live bugs, it's not an excuse to point finger at the QA. I like to think that QA always does the best with the time that was given to them. I sound a little bit like Gandalf now, but it's true. QA very often has limited time and limited resources, and they're trying to do their best. And if you see that there are some, let's call them bad bugs, the one that are really affecting the players and the game appearing, have post-mortem afterwards and try to figure out why did this happen, what can we do differently in the future to avoid this, because this is also a learning process. And every kind of hot fix or every critical bug found in live ops should teach us a lesson on how to prevent this happening in the future. Now, sometimes we have to consider that some bugs might not be actually even worth fixing. That's a different part of the live bugs. And then we have to consider to cut off the support for that specific device or platform. If you notice, like how to do that, if you notice that there are many issues on particular device or operating system version, sometimes it's better to cut it off. And how we decide is, first we have to look what's the percentage of active players on that particular device. If your a percentage of the active player is 0.01, that's probably one person, or maybe 5 or even 100, but it's a small percentage. We can handle this. Of that percentage of people who are active player on that particular device, what's the percentage of buyers? This is the business, and it's important. If it's a 0, and we have to spend literally weeks fixing bugs on that for that particular device or platform, it's just too expensive to maintain. Is it very specific? Is it very relevant for specific markets? Let's say this is maybe the most popular device in a German market, and German market is your main market. Like, is this something that we should take into account? And what does it mean when we cut off the support? How is it going to affect the existing players? Does it mean that multiplayer is going to stop working? Social integrations will stop working? Or does it mean the whole game will stop so the players won't be able to play? Or does it just mean that the game can't be updated anymore? So it's also really important to understand, depending on the architecture of your game, what's going to happen to those players when the platform support is cut off. And just remember, Sometimes it's more efficient to cut off support for one device or one operating system than spending all the time from your team to fix bugs on that platform. Because you know what, you have only limited time. And while you're focusing on fixing bugs for a handful of players, you might have thousands of players playing on other devices or playing on the other operating systems who are suffering because you can't divide your attention enough to serve everybody. So just make sure that, look into these patterns, and if you notice them, talk to your producer, talk to your team, and it's not the end of the world. It's just normal that sometimes we have to do things like that. I mentioned before that when you do live ops, you're going to work with slightly different teams than you used to before. So one of these new team members that you're going to work with is actually customer support or player support. It can be called slightly different depending on the company you're working with, but it means the same thing. These are the people who take care of the talking directly to the players. Customer support is not a QA, and they're not either above or below QA. So it's just kind of separate department, but they work directly with players, and they will get lots of bug reports just by the nature of it, because players will comment about things that don't work in the game and which they don't like. So that means that customer support and QA have to work together. Often it happens in the live ops that QA will spend lots of time with customer support because they will try to find the bugs that the players found or retest. And then they might run out of the time for actual feature testing. So this is also something for you in a QA to balance out, that you work with the customer support and you're here to validate all the issues that they find, but you have to find a balance between also doing the QA for the new features and for the new updates and for the new things that are coming into your game. And if you see that you're running out of time, that you can't really do both, then it's a time to talk to your producer and say, hey, I have very conflicting priorities. I don't have enough time to do both. What should we do? So how to avoid this to do too much testing for the customer support bugs? Customer support will actually help you with that as well, to decide what's a real bug, what's a serious issue, and what is not that serious or it can wait. So ask the customer support team when they're reporting issues to check the following things. Firstly, very important, how many players are affected by something. Of course, it's hard to give percentages, but it's a very different if you have one very loud player complaining about something and nobody else is complaining about that, or if you have like tens or hundreds of tickets of people complaining. Check what devices and platforms are affected. Sometimes it's very narrow. It just affects specific device or operating system or combination of device and operating system. Very important how quickly this escalates. You might get one person complaining today, then another person tomorrow, then maybe two people on Wednesday. But it also might happen that you have one person complaining at 9 a.m. in the morning, 10 people complaining around 11, and 100 by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You're having a serious issue here. Also, try to include customer support in development as early as possible. If you keep customer support separated from development team, they will not really understand how development process works, how prioritization works, and also they will not know about the new features on time. So if they involved with the development team early, they will know what features are coming. They can prepare their frequently asked questions on time. They can discuss it with the QA what are the biggest risks they have seen. And they will also understand how the development team actually works. So that means that, because if you keep them very separated, they won't have any of this knowledge, and they will get information about the new feature just, sometimes just even hours before the players find out. Or sometimes not even then, they will find out from the angry players. And it's really not fair on them, because the more they know in advance, the more prepared they can be, and they can do a better job in serving the players. And one piece of advice for the end, don't be a hostage to the angry player. Sometimes it happens that certain players will be very loud about issues that affect maybe only them, or it might be something that's very specific to their device. Maybe it's something even broken, or maybe it's their internet connection. If you realize that this is not a general issue, it affects only one person, I know it's very unpleasant that somebody is rude or very loud or keeps bombarding the customer support, but you can't keep the whole team hostage of the one person. Your game probably has thousands or millions of players, and you are here to serve them all. So here, make sure that you do address every issue and that you do support your players. But if you realize that you have 3 or 4 or 5 people spending most of the time on just handling one player, that's not the best use of your time. Another team member you're going to get besides customer support is analytics. When you talk about free-to-play games, you work a lot with analytics. They are super important part of the team, and they are here to help you set up the way to measure players' behavior in the game. Uh, they're generally keen to share their findings and reports, and they can get you lots of data about how players interact with the game. These data can really help QA, and I often find it's underutilized in a gaming studios, because this can help you to prioritize your testing and what to focus on, because you will know what players are focused on and how they spend their time. So this is very useful when you're determining your test sets to understand how player behaves, or when you want to consider cutting off certain devices support or operating system support. Some of the examples, for example, here that if lots of players are dropping off relatively early in the game, that means that players don't necessarily understand the game. They don't know how to play it, or they might don't think it's fun. Hopefully it's not that, because if players think the game is not fun, that means that the game won't live very long. But if it's just a matter of not understanding it, some improvements or changes in the first-time user experience or tutorial can remedy that quite a bit. And there are some other things as well that you can see that, for example, if you have a game which has frequent events, that if you see that like 90% of your players are playing the events, that it's like, okay, these events are played by almost everybody. We really want to make sure that they're tested properly. I'm simplifying here because you should always test the events. But analytics will always give you really, really good information about where your players are at, how they behave in the games, what items they're using, and how they're using them. And when you have very limited time to spend on testing, this is really important information, because we all kind of like to think about ourselves as the gamers, or that we understand the players, but very often we are subjective. So analytics really allows you to be fully objective and to really represent the player in your team. And last but definitely not least, who should actually work in live ops QA? Well, in live ops in general. Um, Working in live ops, it's a bit different, and it's not for everybody. It's very fast paced. It can be very stressful. And just the attitude that you need to have is you need to be quick, and you need to learn all the time, and you should be able to adopt. I always like to say to people that if you really enjoy change, and if you like continuous learning, live ops is a great place to work. You will never be bored. Like, things are changing all the time, and there's always something new coming. But if you prefer something slow paced, boxed in with the beginning and the end, you'll find it's quite stressful. It's important to have this thinking outside of the box, because sometimes we'll encounter problems that you couldn't even predict, or situations you couldn't predict. Then you have to have this way of thinking like, how can I solve this? Because there's nobody who would know the answer to this. You really have to kind of figure it out. This is also this is a place where you have to work closely with the rest of the team. If you're a lone wolf who likes to do things alone without much interaction with the others, this might not be the best spot. You need to be good in balancing between shifting priorities in a short period of time. Something that was really important now might become irrelevant next hour, because we just dropped something or changed something, or we have a really hot fix coming up for a live bug. So things change, and you have to be able to adopt this and not get too stressed about it. And if you're using some external testing partners to test for you, and very often in the gaming studios you do that, make sure that your testing partner has the same qualities as well, that they really know how to work with the live ops, because otherwise you're gonna end up with lots of time wasted and lots of problems. So I hope that this opened a little bit the door to the live ops and Q&A live ops and got you interested. I personally find this part of a QA very rewarding and very interesting and super important. So I hope you learned something useful, and I'll see you all in the next module.